anyone else when asking those questions. And what we'll do is open up that during that time instead of having to type in message or anything. If you want to share your contact information in the group chat, feel free to do so. I know sometimes this provides a little bit of opportunity for some networking. And then it also does allow, if we do have other questions that we need to follow up with you guys. So feel free to put that information in there if you'd like. A little bit about, I believe most of you have chimed in and know Greta, but I'll read you a little bit of information about her. Dr. Greta Mayer is the CEO of the Mental Health Recovery Board of Clark, Greene, and Madison Counties. We want to thank you for joining us this morning. The Mental Health Recovery Board is one of 51 boards across the state that connects residents and caring systems, provides pathways to services for mental health and substance use, and facilities delivery of quality care with resources for prevention, treatment, and support. Dr. Mayer is passionate about helping people and systems become stronger, more compassionate, and healthier. She received her undergraduate from Wittenberg University and graduate degrees from the Universities of Dayton and Cincinnati. Greta, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Chamber, for inviting us, and we appreciate the partnership with you, and also really appreciate your leadership during this time. And we were talking about this before everyone signed on, just how important it is to have educational programs and things happening in this new environment that we're all in. Ways for people to connect is really important, and I'm going to be talking more about that today. So Beaver Creek Chamber, you're being a resilient business and a leader, so that's exciting. So keep up the great work. So we can move on to the next slide. You already talked about who I am. I did do clinical work with kids and families with Greene County Schools for about 8 years, and that was through the Greene County Educational Service Center. So began doing that kind of work and then made this transition to administrative work and then joined the board. It'll be 13 years in August that I've worked for the Mental Health Recovery Board and moved into the CEO role about 4.5 years ago. So lots of interesting times of change. And so I'll share a little bit about my experience as we go along too during COVID-19 and where we are as an agency too, with many of you, I'm sure, in similar ways, looking at your processes, changing your policies, and you know, building the airplane while we're flying it, so to speak. I'm going to be talking today, like you can see, about finding resilience in a time of turmoil. We're going to talk a little bit about the business turmoil first that will feel very familiar to you and I'm hoping will resonate. And I'm also interested in hearing from you when we discuss later some of the things specifically that you are experiencing that we may not touch on. So I'm eager to hear feedback from you today too. So we'll start talking a little bit about that, and then we'll focus the majority of the time about the concept of resilience and the construct of resilience as a psychological concept and construct, and how do we learn and be intentional about building resilience, which we all have the capacity for, which is the hopeful part in all of this. And then just sharing with you a little bit about us and how we can connect moving forward. So that's what we're doing today. So next slide, please. And as Amanda mentioned, we are local government. So we're considered a behavioral health authority, and behavioral health means mental health and addiction, the substance use concerns. It does include gambling addiction, which is more of a newer concept that our agencies who provide the care, our care providers, are trained to provide assessment now for gambling as an addictive disorder. And oftentimes it's hidden and connected to other financial strain and things. But we largely call these behavioral health issues. And we consider behavioral health a form of physical health as well. There's a connection, a mind-body connection, and both are important. And I think there's more and more attention now and a tipping point, and certainly through COVID-19, the tornadoes that went through Beaver Creek, COVID-19, the social unrest and calls for racial equality are major traumatic, can be traumatic events and life-changing events that we are all experiencing in different ways. So we can all relate if you consider mental health on a continuum, which we do. And so there's different degrees at different times in your life of these things. But the good news is there's many ways to grow the healthy part and reduce and pay attention to minimizing the potential for the unhealthy parts. So as a behavioral health board, we're one of 50 across the state, and we're statutorily responsible for providing these pathways to care, ensuring that there's a full continuum. And that means for early childhood, starting with age 0 and the families attached to young people, all the way up through older age and in elderly populations, that mental health and the capacity to improve mental health is there across the lifespan. And so it's important for us to contract and pass funding through property tax revenue. And in Greene County, we have 1.5 mills that generates annually about 4.3 million, just over that. And that makes up a large part of our budget that then we contract to care providers, nonprofits, and occasionally a for-profit that has services that Greene County residents need. And so we have services, like I said, across the continuum to help all kinds of people when they need those services. And in many cases, maybe receiving services from a prevention standpoint and not even realize it. And we can talk a little bit more about how businesses can help with that through some prevention, capacity building, policy creation, so to speak. So we are certified as a board. Not all boards in Ohio are. So it's a culture of quality certification, meaning we meet or exceed standards of the requirements to be a board that has quality. So we're excited to be a part of that. And we'll be coming up, our review is going to be December, but with everything COVID related, it will be postponed since we're not sure if our surveyors will be on site at that point or not to be able to check all of our adherence to those standards. So next slide, please. So I mentioned we cover 3 counties, Clark County, Greene County, Madison County. Our office is located in Springfield, and it serves, again, the region. We used to have individual boards for every county in Ohio, but with becoming more efficient and saving on administrative costs, many boards like us have more than one county. So we are situated in Clark, but we serve Greene through these care providers. These are the entities that deliver prevention, mental health and addiction prevention, as well as treatment services, which include assessment to figure out what is the concern that people are presenting with or their families, and then also looking at what kinds of things are troubling them that they would like to get assistance for, and developing a treatment plan. Supportive services include the things that keep people healthy and well once they get treatment. It could be housing, it could be brushing up on job skills or learning new skills for the first time, and so employment supports and those kinds of things. Those are the long-term recovery supports to keep people healthy and well ongoing. So these care providers deliver a variety of those services that are important. So the next slide, please. And so the business-related stressors, I'm wondering if some of these might resonate with you. I'm guessing this is the case. If there's anything we can count on during this time, it's that things are changing rapidly, even from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And business leaders and employees are needing to make decisions constantly and make decisions without all the facts. I was sharing with Amanda before everyone joined, one of the challenges for us as serving 3 different counties is that we have 3 different public health commissioners. It sounds like a problem. They're wonderful people and they're great leaders. Melissa Howell, of course, you know, in Greene County. And Greene County has had one of the lowest rates of COVID-19 cases in Southwest Ohio. And Greene County has been tremendously, I would say, resilient in the face of this. pandemic. And the opening up of businesses has occurred more quickly than it has in Clark County and Madison County. So in Clark and Madison, we still have workplace outbreaks and hotspots. Greene County, we don't have those, knock on wood, to date. And so I'm grateful to be a resident of Fairborn, to live in Greene County. And the difference, though, is that working in one of the zip codes where our office is located with the second highest rate of COVID positive cases in Clark County poses additional challenges for me as a leader. About half of our staff live within the 3 counties. And so the other half do not, and are coming in from Miami and Montgomery and Clinton and so on, Champaign County. And so what we're experiencing with the pandemic is localized effects. Some of our Appalachian, my counterparts in those counties, have had very few cases, and then others, you know, different. And so how it's happening and what may happen in the fall when they talk about returning with schools and what happens with schools and families, and if there is a resurgence with the flu, like they're predicting could happen. Again, as businesses, we're making these decisions on a regular basis, and there's fatigue with that. There's exhaustion with that. The Zoom fatigue, so the meetings and virtually, you may find yourself working even harder when you're working from home, or to make up for not being in the office. I don't know if that resonates with any of you. It's a real thing. Many of us overdo because we feel like we're cheating if we're at home, or we may feel just less effective because we don't have the things we normally do at our fingertips. We're not connecting with our coworkers, our staff, other peers through that networking and support. When everything is remote or not face-to-face, it does pose additional challenges for connection. So some of those things may resonate with you, but there really is a brain change that occurs in all of us when we're doing virtual meetings and trying to scan and read cues. Like during a presentation like this, I'm a people person and an extrovert, and I really enjoy being with people and interacting, and that, you know, gives me juice to interact with people. So interacting in this way, being able to see you just like this, and maybe being concerned about the technology not working, and our hand gestures are up near our face, because rather than, you know, if you're a hand person, gesture person, it can be challenging to read those social cues and nonverbal, because we get a big portion of the communication through those means physically, not just verbally. So that can pose an additional challenge for us, and meeting with our teams and keeping employee morale up, keeping folks who are having challenges with their own family, maybe with their own children being out of school, needing to you know, miss those important milestones of graduation and so on in the usual way. We're dealing with personal family things as well as our business things. So those stresses can be really overwhelming at times for us. And this caretaker role too, not being able to see our older family members that we have responsibility for caretaking, and that additional barrier and separation. I've talked with quite a few people that have, you know, their older family members having other health conditions, and then the worry of contracting COVID-19 on top of it, and being separated and not able to participate in some of those healthcare visits for loved ones, again, poses additional strain. And this social isolation piece, there's a study that said 77% of Americans report close relationships that provide us with that emotional security, that support, this feeling of well-being. And even short periods of social isolation can cause symptoms of anxiety and depression. It can cause some of these things to really feel like they're spinning out of control for us. That's just short periods, and we're talking about, this has been quite a long period of stay at home. And even as things are opening back up, I chat with a lot of different people who, you know, really don't go to the grocery unless it's absolutely necessary, aren't going out to dinner, you know, yet, or picking and choosing those social things that we used to do on a regular basis. and considering exposure for us and our loved ones in ways that we hadn't done previously. And then ongoing social isolation has physical health implications. And I mentioned the physical health, behavioral health connection, and we talk about them as they're different, but they're really not. And so high blood pressure, for example, heart disease, cancer, those kinds of things are increased. Our risk for those things are increased with prolonged social isolation. And so there's a real imperative. It makes these issues that much more important for us to combat that social isolation. And there's a strategy I'll share with you in a bit that's a statewide strategy that is really a neat idea to help remember to make those social connections every day. So what you may find in yourself and in your loved ones and your employees is that for the first time, people who didn't have symptoms of anxiety or depression or worries or concerns now may be having them for the first time. And it may be surprising to people because usually they could go for a run and feel better, or they could, connect with a friend and, share their worries and concerns and move on. But now may be experiencing things that are troubling and interfering with their ability to feel effective at work, be productive, maybe care for others in the same way, their family members, or just those routine tasks that used to just you do without thinking now are very difficult to do. And then on the other hand, for those of us who may already have symptoms of anxiety, depression, or some other mental health or substance use issue, maybe people are in recovery and doing quite well, and then this hits, and it can trigger things that you hadn't dealt with for a very long time. And so we call it a reoccurrence rather than a relapse of those symptoms. It's really a reoccurrence, just like another physical health condition like cancer or something else. These things come and go. Diabetes, you have it under control, so to speak, and then you have trouble with your sugar. You need to adjust your medication. Same thing here with mental health concerns and substance use concerns. And even, I will point out, even though I do like my Chuy's margarita that I can get to go when my husband and I get carry out from Chuy's, that's in our rotation, the availability of alcohol, and if you followed this through this time, since you can carry it out, we have even areas that are designated drinking areas with open containers in our communities. The availability and accessibility of alcohol has increased dramatically during this time, and so have the sales. So if you follow this, we had people from Pennsylvania that didn't have the opening up of these stores and resources coming in the eastern side of Ohio to buy their liquor and their alcohol. So I bring this up just to say, if you find yourself drinking more, indulging more in something that used to be a treat, that you just want to keep an eye on that, okay? Using more and getting into a routine does have effects on your physical health, your mental health, and your brain, quite frankly. And with increased stress and other things that are happening can really concoct with increasing symptoms of anxiety and depression. It can really increase those things. So, the other thing with businesses that I'll say is this cost of figuring out, so the cost to the small business in particular, about figuring out how to create barriers. You're purchasing new things in your workspace to keep your employees safe, cleaning practices, sanitizing, routines and costs that you never had, that are not just short-lived. Just like we know the pandemic isn't a quick thing. I think when this first started in March, I don't know if you were like me, I thought, oh, well, we'll be able to nip this in the bud and flatten this curve, and then we'll get back to business as usual. Well, as we know, it's going to be a long-term change. And so our businesses have to adapt and change for the long haul. And there's costs associated with that financially. And then also this fatigue of leaders in figuring out, okay, what is the thing I need to make sure of? And if my employee becomes infected and needs to quarantine, what does that mean for my bottom line? I don't have the depth of employees to step in because maybe I had to furlough some. Maybe I even had to do layoffs. And I'm not sure when I'll be able to get back to where I was before, or if I ever will. And some small businesses are looking at their neighbors and they're not opening, but the other businesses, so there's an impact there in the business community as well. So I mentioned this already, the idea of telecommuting, telework may be here to stay. The idea of virtual meeting space like we're doing today may be something that we keep. There are things moving forward that might be new ways of doing business, but there can also be some grief and some sadness for those after hour, chamber chats, things that we would enjoy with each other, and times to network and breakfast and so on. So those kinds of things, we may long for what was and hoping that it comes back, or maybe being worried that it never will exactly get back to how it was. So there's a little bit of grief and loss associated with some of these things as well. So I mentioned self-care here at the bottom of the list, which is funny because it always is kind of at the bottom of our list. So all of you as business leaders may put the needs of your employees, your family members, your friends ahead of yourself. I don't know if that rings true to you, but I'm guessing it's probably very likely. And the usual self-care practices, so for me, the day yoga in Beaver Creek was a place that I just loved going, and I loved the instructors, and it was my peaceful, blissful place. And so I went as long as I could, even though I probably shouldn't have. They hadn't officially shut down yet. I said, well, I won't touch anything. I'll just have my little mat and I'll do my thing in the corner and won't be next to other people. And I was really upset. I found myself really missing and longing for that blissful place and relaxation. I couldn't find that. And so I ended up finding yoga online, Adrienne by Yoga or whatever, Yoga by Adrienne on YouTube, if anyone wants a yoga tip. She has been great and has had a tremendous following too during this time, which is interesting. But this idea of self-care, the things that were in your routine, you can just think about doing it double. Just doubling up on your basic needs. Sleep, get as much rest as you can. The kinds of things you're eating, I mentioned the margaritas, the salty rim that I love. Need to watch myself on that. And also this idea of hydration, not over caffeinating. That's the other thing. When you're go, I tend to overdo on the caffeine. For those who maybe put down nicotine, maybe have had noticed that they've had trouble and picking up that habit again. It is an addiction. It's a tough one. And so these things that sometimes aren't healthy ways to cope may replace some of the healthy things we were doing. So those healthy eating is really important too. So when you fuel your body with those fruits, vegetables, lean meats and proteins, or whatever your eating style is, to increase the healthy parts and decrease the less, the fast food and the stuff that feels good for a minute, but really has longer lasting effects. So all of these things, your basic health, exercise is the other, of course, they all help with your mental health as well as your physical. It's just they're inextricably linked. So this idea of self-care really could be thought of as self-compassion during this time. You may be frustrated with yourself too, because you're not doing the things you probably could be doing or you really want to do, but end of the day you're exhausted because of all of these things. Go easy on yourself and figure out what is realistic for me, right? You're not going to hit all those healthy things and all those behaviors overnight. You're not going to be able to impact and change them overnight. But set some goals for yourself. Where could you make gentle movement in any of those areas? Where do you want to start? And start there. And be gentle with yourself and show yourself compassion when you don't hit the mark. Because we don't want to create more stress saying, oh, well, I'm not doing self-care and so I'm failing. Because that's not helpful either and tends to get us stuck instead of letting things up. So for the next slide, if you could move on to that. This is the part about resilience. So those healthy practices, the self-care, is really ways to build resilience. You can think about it as your bouncing back in the face of adversity, in the face of things that could be an event, and for some feels very traumatic. And the experience of it is traumatic. For others, it may not be as traumatic. So there is subjectivity in what trauma means for people, or what an adverse event is. Maybe something that happened in childhood that you hadn't thought about in many, many years, all of a sudden you're dreaming about it. It's coming out sideways in some regards. So that's a hint that maybe there's something there that is troubling to you. And this recent pandemic has triggered some of those past hurts, past adverse events, and even maybe traumatic events, for example. So threats to our safety and our health are really those kinds of things that can trigger these feelings of adversity, these feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, painful, emotionally painful, and in some cases feels like physical pain. But the hopeful part is this resilience concept. Resilience is common. It's not a unique thing. We all have the capacity for resilience, and the awesome part is we can learn ways to become more resilient by some of those healthy self-care practices I mentioned, and some others that I'll cover in a minute, that anyone can learn helpful thinking strategies, actions we can all take, and thinking and emotions that anyone can practice the way you feel and change the way you feel to build that resilience. I've heard of resilience being thought of as a bounce back in the face of trauma or adversity. And I've also heard, and I can't remember who it was, I'll have to look this up, called it a bounce forward, which I kind of like that concept instead of a bounce back, which seems like regression, if you're moving forward movement, that seems more hopeful to me. This idea of connections. What we're doing today is a way to connect with each other, and that's hugely important. What the statewide strategy is 5 connections a day. So if you can think about reaching out, text, call, email to 5 people in your life every day, strive for 5 is the quote. That helps you and it helps the other person feel less isolated. It bridges that social connection. And I just encourage you to do that. Fostering wellness, taking care of your body, finding some way to quiet your mind, whatever that means for you, not neglecting your spirit. I think sometimes we think about the mind and the body, but we don't always include the spirit. And for many of us, that's the heart and soul of who we are. And so what do you do to take care of your spirit? How do you nurture your passions? How do you, revive something in you that you hadn't done in a while? For me, during this time, I'll just share, I hadn't done anything really creative in a long time, and I sketched. And that happened during this period of COVID-19 and the stay at home. And so I've gotten excited about putting up a barrier in our deck, and what that could look like and how it could be landscaped. And that really ignited something in me that I had neglected for a while. So that's just one example for me. But think about what those things are for you. Again, mindfulness is something you can just learn a lot about. There's free apps out there to help practice mindfulness and consider that spirituality component. Finding purpose is another important one. And that can, again, look at your passions and reignite some things maybe you've shelved for a while, and that can help you find meaning in new ways. And your purpose is beyond, your caretaker role, your role as a business leader. What are the other meaningful things that define who you are, that you want to spend time doing and choose to make time for it? The healthy thinking is a big one. It is very easy for us to get in a loop of negative thinking. And for some, it's really challenging. Those who are predisposed to having anxious, obsessive thoughts, things, for those who were clean freaks before, and I say freaks in a nice way, a lovingly way, that this idea of getting germs on us and keeping ourselves and our families, sanitized at all times can be very worrisome, very troubling for those that this is something that's important to them before this happened. And so figuring out, what's the right balance to strike for that. So thinking, when your thoughts are overtaken by fears, by anxieties, worries, the things that you can't stop, it may be time to seek professional help. And I really encourage people to seek help sooner, professional help by a licensed clinician, sooner rather than later. And if you've connected with someone in the past and hadn't thought about them in a while and they're still doing business, or maybe they aren't providing therapy anymore, they likely have a list of people they refer to. You know, talk to people like me at the MHRB. We're happy to help connect people to care. That's what we regularly do. And if you have trouble connecting, we will work with you to find a place to really connect. Right now, we're working on a project to contract with private care providers, therapy clinicians in Greene County, as well as in other of our 2 counties, so that if as a business leader, perhaps you don't want to walk in to a local place that is a clinical service provider, and you'd prefer a little bit more anonymity for you and your family, that we have arrangements with private as well as public agencies, nonprofits, to provide quality care, and specifically have some additional training around trauma and how to effectively cope during situations like this. So we're developing those contracts now, and that goes live. We're hopeful it'll go live next week. So contact us, and we would be happy to get you connected to some of those care providers. We're focusing on first responders and healthcare workers. So if you know of any of those folks, or if you are any of those folks, we really want to prioritize pathways for those folks, but as well as everyone else. So knowing where to seek help and how to ask for it seems to be half the battle. But I encourage you, just like you would, make an appointment for your dentist, you would go see a chiropractor for different things. You go to a specialist. This is another specialty area that you can access and have at your fingertips when times are tough, and hopefully before it's a crisis. Because it's easier to get back on a healthy path before you're in crisis mode. It just takes a little bit longer if it's a full-fledged crisis. But I encourage you, again, if you have that little thought about it, start talking to a trusted friend and process your feelings. We'll move to the next slide, please. And so tips to build that resilience. So the things that you can do is really finding new ways to cope with stress, things that you haven't done in the past, but maybe it's something new that you'd like to try. Maybe it's some strategy that even is accessible online rather than going to the gym if your gym isn't open yet for physical health things. Maybe it's something in your faith community. It could be a group that you participate in, even virtually, that you had talked about doing for a while and never took that next step, the book club, for example, and you're getting that started. We're getting one started in our office too, so that's exciting. Also, just keeping a schedule, creating some boundaries for yourself with what's work time, what's play time, fun, social time, and so on. And practicing those routines. Likely they're different routines than what they used to be, but embracing those things, and just know things are going to change again and you're going to need to adapt. And so that's the one thing we can count on, is that we will continue to make change and we'll continue to adapt. Remember September 11th. I don't have to tell you what that was like for you. And I remember where I was and things that have happened. And when we visit our friends in Manhattan, the way New York City looks, will never be the same. But we've bounced back. We've bounced forward from that event, haven't we? Life is different. It was a time-limited event, although we have repercussions that we deal with, but we do it and we move on. So we have a history of doing that, and we'll do it again with this, and we already are doing it. So I think it's important to recognize that. So consulting with health experts is always a great way. Talking with trusted friends and experts just to put your ideas out there and get some feedback. Be choosy about who you connect with. Connect with people who listen and you reciprocate back, and it's this back and forth. Limit your interactions with those folks that aren't supportive, that aren't healthy for you, and that. There are people that I've chosen, and one may be a family member that I will not disclose, not my husband, but in my family, that I limit my interactions with that person because, it's just not helpful, especially now with what we're dealing with. So it's okay to set limits, boundaries, and not connect with people who aren't helpful for you. Again, look for extremes in your thoughts, feelings, and reactions, and those that you care about. When you notice a change from what's, normal for that person or for you, it's time to seek some additional support. professional and otherwise. One final note, there's a couple psychologists that had coined the term post-traumatic growth. This is different than resilience. Not everybody can respond in this growthful way, but when you've had extreme adversity, extreme trauma, something that's rocked you to your core about your beliefs, your worldview, who you are as a person, and you've adapted in a positive way, it takes a lot of time to work through it. You get to a new growth place in who you are that you never thought you could have done and wouldn't have been able to achieve without that traumatic event. So there's something really neat about that the potential is there for us outside of this event and the events of today that could create something new and different for us and for our families and our businesses, that could be something greater than we can even imagine. So I'll just leave you with that thought because it's interesting to think about. And the next slide, please. These are resources, and I know you're going to have access to the PowerPoint, so I won't go through them. There is a COVID care line that's been available. It's been helpful. We've had folks call from our area and get connected and referred to local treatment providers and support providers, so that's really great. TCN Behavioral Health has psychiatry if you need medications and need an assessment for that, as well as counselors and licensed folks. And those other treatment providers that were on the earlier list also provide different kinds of services. And they're doing telehealth, so you don't even have to leave your business. If you have a private spot, you don't have to leave your workstation at home to engage in therapy for the first time. And we believe there's movement, the emergency orders that went into effect at the state level to permit payment for telehealth rather than face-to-face sessions is going to stay. And so we're even advocating at the federal level so that can be onward. Again, it's an accessibility thing. This is a new way of being, and I think it provides some security and safety for those reaching out for the first time. We're partnering with other agencies to deliver the message that help's available, and we're continuing to do that. So behavioral health is essential health care. We've been open this whole time, just providing care in a different way. And I wanted to point out Family Violence Prevention Center, which is a contract care provider of ours. They initiated a new text line, a crisis text line during this time. We have seen increased incidences of domestic violence. We've also heard from our Child Protective Services that they're concerned that the reports are lower, but they're assuming that that isn't indicative of less child abuse and neglect happening. We do know when people are in additional stressful situations, facing financial things they hadn't in a while or ever experienced, loss of a home and other things, that can create stress and strain. Unhealthy ways of managing that can be violence, interpersonal violence. So just wanted to point out that text line that has been used in Greene County and has been a great resource. So I compliment Debbie Matheson for getting that going during this time. The next slide, please. Again, additional resources for you. We'd love to have you join our business e-blast. We're working on during this time to make it relevant for businesses during COVID-19 and how to manage. So you'll get that in your inbox if you so choose, and some featured articles, videos, and helpful things. Something coming soon for business is also a toolkit for those in recovery from mental health or addiction that are in our workplace. So the most people that we have in our workplaces, that most people with substance use problems are working people. They're in our places of employment. And again, I mentioned for those who may struggle with substance use prior to COVID-19, may be finding themselves really struggling now and needing more support. So we want to help businesses have effective policies in place for people to get help, but also protect the business in doing so. So those are some of the things that you'll be seeing from us this year. We'll continue that work. So hopefully you can join us by participating in that e-blast. So the next slide is just connecting our Facebook page and website. We'd love for you to visit. You can, if you're ever having trouble connecting with any one of us, you can use the contact us feature through our website, and we'll get back to you that way as well. Don't hesitate to reach out. Oftentimes that's the thing that is the hardest for people, just making that first call with whomever that person is to talk about what may be troubling you. But just know that we're a resource for you to do that. So at this time, I would entertain any questions or comments that you have.
Thank you, Greta. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions if you guys have questions.
And I'm curious if any of you have experienced other stressful scenarios or things that you're dealing with now as a business that you may want to share or put in the chat box. I'd be eager to hear that as well.
Greta, I have a question about the school year coming up. Are you working at all with any of the local school districts with helping some of the mental health issues and anxiety with the teachers and or students returning?
Oh, that's a great question, Beth. Thank you. Yes, and so one of the care providers that we work with is the Greene County Educational Service Center that provides support to all the Greene County schools. So we fund a school-based mental health program through them, and what they've been doing and are continuing to do over the summer, many of these care providers that serve the schools have been working in different ways to connect with families, getting tips for parents, still offering educational sessions, consultation for administrators and teachers around how they're adapting. So there's an initiative through ODE, the Ohio Department of Education, in partnership with Ohio Mental Health and Addiction Services, our state department, and then local boards and then community care providers. There was additional funding that Governor DeWine put towards K-12 to help with all of these issues for young people prior to COVID-19 hitting. So all those plans got interrupted midstream. And so what has happened is transitioning. How can we help schools with these care providers address what their urgent issues are in the immediate need to get through the rest of the school year, and then this idea of what can we do over the summer to help kids and families and also administration. So I've been a part of one of our district's leadership teams that are going through this whole child initiative, and several Greene County schools are participating as well. And this idea of social emotional health is just as important as the academics, right? And those kinds of things that traditionally schools focus on. So I think this time that we're in has just highlighted how we need more. And it's going to be for the long run, because this is not easy for families. It's not easy for teachers to all of a sudden overnight. I have a close girlfriend that's a teacher, to teach online. It's been a real challenge. And then for parents to be teachers too for the first time of their children, poses additional challenge. But this whole child initiative, and I'll say Wright State University, Dr. Lorson, through the health education division, has been a statewide leader in this, and he's advocated for health standards at the state level to include this whole child concept and to include mental health, substance use, awareness, so that at very young ages, we can teach our kids how to be resilient. We can teach our kids to have a vocabulary to talk about these things, because many of us didn't learn that growing up. I mean, we didn't, know what these things were and are. And so doing that at earlier ages, it's pretty cool. So I know Wright State and other universities in our area are doing really awesome supports for schools to help them with this process as well. I know that's a very long answer, but did that get at that for you?
Yes, thank you.
There's so much more we could do. And I know schools' bottom lines are tough. So we know the school levies that failed in Greene County, this environment for property tax, revenue, and we're concerned even that our levy receipts are going to be down for all of us that depend on levy revenue in the coming years. We've got the state budget, shortfall. There's true financial pressures in our schools, as was very publicly announced by Governor DeWine, received dramatic cuts. I think that's been what I hear from our superintendents as the greatest challenge that they're facing, and they're advocating, as much as they can to help fill those financial gaps that then trickle down to these kinds of additional things that we really want to weave together, the social, emotional, and academic together.
Greta, I don't have a question, more just kind of a statement here, but I really like the tagline that you guys had under the past couple of slides. It's okay to not be okay, because I feel like that's a big stigma, and sometimes it's hard to remember that it is okay to not be okay all the time. So I wrote that down. I really like that.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, Alyssa. That is exactly something, and that came out of community work, other agencies that we work with through coalitions. We have suicide prevention and substance use coalitions, drug-free coalition, where a bunch of different community members come together to raise awareness about the stigma of seeking help. And so that tagline really came out of that community-based work in Greene County, and I'm really proud to say a former employee had helped push that forward, Adrienne Miller. And so it's okay to not be okay. And you know Adrienne, she helped also in supporting with the tornadoes. So I wanted to recognize her for that, and I think it does resonate with many of us. That's right, it's okay to not be okay, and don't always put on that happy face. That's hard for me to do, and just be real sometimes, and not having a great day. Really, when you ask the question, how's it going, consider being honest. It may be hard to do so. It's a good thing to practice.